Purposeful Nudge introduces autonomy versus efficacy, mapping the public's nudge preferences and nudge theory and studies on how they work.
Instead of issuing strict mandates, modern public policy often guides the choices we make by adjusting the architecture around us. These interventions are divided into two categories. System 1 nudges target automatic, non-educative processing. They operate quietly in the background, conserving our cognitive bandwidth. Take this Canadian cigarette pack. It bypasses deliberation entirely, aiming straight for a visceral reaction to alter behavior. System 2 nudges operate differently. They target deliberate, calculative processing. Their explicit goal is to be educative, providing data to improve a person's capacity to choose. The System 2 equivalent for smoking simply provides purely factual, statistical information regarding health risks, leaving the final calculation entirely up to the individual. System 1 interventions are vastly cheaper to implement and faster to take effect. System 2 interventions, however, inherently respect individual dignity and agency. This dynamic sets up the central conflict for policymakers designing choice architecture. Policy designers often operate on a logical assumption. If an intervention works better and yields higher social welfare, the public will support it. Legal scholar Cass Sunstein designed a survey to test if that assumption actually holds true in practice. The survey gathered data from a nationally representative sample of Americans, capturing perspectives across all partisan lines. The study sought to answer a specific question: how much mathematical proof of effectiveness does it take for people to surrender their demand for autonomy? Analyzing this data reveals a strict breaking point where the public outright rejects statistical efficiency in favor of keeping control. The survey tested 4 standard policy domains: smoking, retirement savings, green energy, and water conservation. This matrix maps the baseline responses. In this neutral condition, respondents were given no information about the effectiveness of either nudge type. The data shows majority support, ranging from 55 to 74%, heavily favoring the educative System 2 approach. This preference is exceptionally strong in the environmental domains, reaching 74%. This slope graph shows the resulting shift in public opinion. A uniform 10 to 12% of respondents move away from System 2 and toward System 1 across all 4 domains. For this segment, an informal cost-benefit analysis takes over. They are willing to trade their autonomy for guaranteed positive outcomes. Condition 3 presented a paradox for choice architects. The qualitative phrases were replaced with hard, lopsided mathematical proof. Respondents were told, for example, that the System 1 nudge cuts pollution by 40%, while System 2 cuts it by only 5%. This diagram visually compares the new data against the previous condition. There is absolutely zero statistically significant movement. Over 40% of the public still rejects System 1, even when shown it is mathematically vastly superior. This creates a plateau. This minority operates on pure normative principle. They require such a high premium for personal agency that no mathematical utility will sway them. Hard data and statistical superiority have a hard limit. They cannot overcome deeply entrenched philosophical demands for freedom of choice. The survey's final condition asked respondents to assume the educative System 2 nudge was the one that was significantly more effective. This chart overlays the Condition 4 data onto the baseline preference. There is a complete lack of movement. The respondents who supported the System 2 approach already assumed their preferred method was better. And the supporters of System 1 don't shift because they prefer it specifically because it is cognitively cheaper and requires less effort. For them, arguments about effectiveness are irrelevant to the function of the nudge. Across all these shifts and plateaus, the data showed surprisingly negligible variance between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. The friction between cognitive tax and active agency is a universal human baseline, independent of partisan politics. When the survey pivots away from standard economic and environmental policies toward fundamental rights and protected populations, the results completely invert. This new matrix maps the data for domains like voter registration and childhood obesity. It shows a stark inversion. System 1 automaticity dominates the baseline preference here. For voter registration, the public overwhelmingly prefers automatic registration when acquiring a driver's license over a public education campaign. To combat childhood obesity, they prefer the silent architectural redesign of school cafeterias over educating parents on the problem. When an intervention facilitates an existing right or protects a group incapable of deliberation, the cognitive tax of System 2 becomes an unacceptable barrier. The public embraces automaticity when it is viewed as an invisible mechanism for protection rather than a restriction. The final distinct issue surveyed was policies aimed at discouraging abortions. This final row of the matrix visualizes the data for this scenario. It shows an overwhelming, rigid dominance for System 2, a brief physician consultation, and a massive rejection of System 1, graphic photos. There is near zero elasticity here, even when effectiveness variables are introduced. When an intervention attempts to discourage a fundamental, deeply personal right, the public universally views System 1 automaticity as hostile manipulation. This data establishes an ultimate lesson for policy designers. Statistical utility alone cannot validate a behavioral intervention. This scale illustrates the final conceptual framework, weighing the control premium against system utility. If a policy restricts behavior or touches personal rights, it must educate. If it removes friction to facilitate a right, it should automate. Successful public policy aligns behavioral science with the inherent dignity of how humans expect to be treated.